Trashidele, 56 years ago on June 16, 1958, the Tibetan resistance movement known as Four River and Six Ranges, or in Tibetan Chushigandu, was born at Drogotha in the Lhoka region south of Tibet. At the time, it claimed to have around 5,000 volunteer soldiers under the commander of Andungo Botashi. Since then, for almost 20 years, there was a war of resistance against the Chinese occupation of Tibet. How critical was the role Chushigandu played in safeguarding our religion and country at the time of Chinese aggression, and what was Chushigandu's accomplishment or legacy, if there was any? To answer this and some other questions, I have invited an expert on Chushigandu. She is a cultural anthropologist and historian specializing in contemporary Tibet. Professor Carole McGranahan at the University of Colorado had for over 2 decades conducted research in Tibetan refugee communities in India and Nepal on the history and politics of the Tibetan guerrilla resistance army known as Chushigandu. She did her PhD thesis on the subject and also published a book in 2010. I'm Dorjee Damdul, and now let us welcome the guest of our show, Professor Carole McGranahan. Welcome,
yes.
Carola.
Thank you very much.
First of all, Carola, I would like to know you have done extensive research on many other subjects, but today I want to focus on Chushigandu. How you become interested in Chushigandu and why it is important?
Okay, very good. So, Dorjee Langa, lo nishu ngurla ranga peyula chimpangi kamandula chimpangi ani tikapla nga purgi kola kamgi kola mambo hakogimintu ani nga kambe loju kamgi loju kola nga loju shindu chongsa ani let's see nga kampe mi mambo genko mangsure genko mambo tiwatilanche kamgi loju karire kamgi choka gikola karire and konso sama kichosho nishijon so tango konso dilalas nga amare kamgi choka jemi mayon konla kam choka pepe kipudu such a big shidetu. Because sama dilas. Meto mambo du nganse kamgi sushu sha be shimshu du. So in this la chera. Ani niba genko sangma dilas. Nganse kampa mi jemi nemdu tupa mambo jobs. Nganse ringi loju be ringpo
loju ringpo
re. Ani Michi Ming Babaleshe. Con Chushigandu Mamire. Yeshimare, Babaleshe. Leshe Batanere, Yene Babaleshe. Con Dilalas. He said Nangsa Kampa mi, Nangsa Tatungwi Gaptu Mato, Jala Nemdu Ringiore. Das. Yene Nge Senga Tikaplara, Lo Nishunganara, Nga Kamgi Loju. Nga hakugimendu kare senagi puge gyarap tep kamgi kola mindu mama mindu right chushi loju mindu Chushigandu gi loju mindu ani so nga tiwatila mambo tepi ani dinga ngala jogging so tambo di jemi mapo ra kamla lebdu ani kampe mi di tenzin dala mala ma subi suson Ani tenzin dalang ma gijela konso jemi mami nemdu let's say rimpo mambo says
tupa mambo je
ani hlasala chinson ani lokala chinson ani Chushigandu mami suson right yine loju di raji Chushigandu gi loju tenzin dalang ma gi loju di kam choka samare again pergi jarap tap Mindu. So, the company mamdu then gencho sangma ngala loju digi korla lason. And konso karichene jala ringiore. Right, tikaba. Nangchu. Tang kimsan. Tang payu. Tang gyorun bashe. Tang per songju kishi. So di ngente na ra di loju di pe gechapore. Pergi kola gechapore. Any karechene mi lojedi hakogimendu.
So. Let me continue in English. You can. You have did your even PhD thesis on Chushigandru, and you even wrote a book, The Arrested History, and then the other titles, The Memories of Forgotten War, and so on. Yes. So what are you trying to revive? Is Chushigandru history forgotten by Tibetan and by the world? It is pretty recent.
Yes, exactly, Dorjee. The title of this book is Arrested Histories, right? Tibet, the CIA, and Memories of a Forgotten War. And what I found when I first started investigating the history of Kham was that many Tibetans, many Ingis, right, many foreigners do not know this history, but many Tibetans also do not know this history. And even often family members of Chushigandruk soldiers do not know this history. Right? So many Tibetans who served in Chushigandru or in Tenzin Dalai do not feel they can tell their stories yet. They feel the time has not come. Now that was 20 years ago.
Right.
So in 20 years things are slowly changing. And so more stories are being told. We have some former soldiers writing their biographies, or sometimes their families, writing their stories for them. Jamyang Norbu has been very important in writing, you know, much about the resistance, and he also went to Mustang and served in Mustang. But we have histories from people such as, you know, Ratu Ngawang, who has recently written Lamot Sering's, you know, multiple volumes. So things are changing. These are mostly in the Tibetan language, and they are only circulated so far. All right, but still, we are in a moment where you know, this history remains somewhat controversial, and yet it is so important for the history of Tibet in the 20th century.
Okay, so Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, in his memo wrote that Dalai Lama was the core of what the Chushigandru resistance army were defending. So do you think Chushigandru played a critical role in safely escorting him to exile?
Yes. The Chushigandru army played an incredibly important role in escorting Dalai Lama, you know, to exile. He might not have been able to come to exile, you know, were it not for the Chushigandruk soldiers. So in some ways, and as other people, including Jamyang Norbu, have argued, that there might not be a Tibetan refugee community, you know, if it wasn't for Chushigandruk. Right? That Chushigandruk really did an important job in kind of securing the route for the Dalai Lama, but also by really showing the Chinese that the Tibetans were going to fight back.
But there are some people in exile, even like prominent people like Sandu Rinpoche wrote in his book that Chushigandru result was absolutely nil. They could not defend anything. What's your thought on that?
Right. Well, in one way, he's correct, right, in that the Chushigandruk army was not able to save Tibet from the Chinese. And one of the reasons for that is very obvious. You know, the population of China and the size of the Chinese army was so much larger than the Tibetans. And remember, Chushigandruk was not the government army of Tibet, right? This was a citizen army. This was Tibetan men who were farmers, who were nomads, who were traders, who were monks, right, who were not trained soldiers, but who came together to fight. The Tibetan army did not, they helped a little bit, but not too much.
So it is said that Mao Zedong, when heard Dalai Lama escaped, then he seemed to have remarked, say, okay, if Dalai Lama escaped, then we lost the war. Is that the case now?
I think it's still very true that China has lost the war in Tibet, and I think the evidence for that is the 138 self-immolations that have taken place over the last several years. I think the Tibetan people have spoken clearly again and again to show their dissatisfaction with China, and specifically to say clearly their desire for the Dalai Lama to return to Tibet.
And then do you think by any chance that the result of Chushigandru resistant army's operation could have come out differently?
Could the Chushigandruk army have had a more positive outcome? The one thing that would really have needed would be for foreign governments to have fully supported the Chushigandruk army with military power. So the United States supported with some supplies, with some training, but not with any US troops, and not the sort of support that would have truly enabled Tibet to defeat China militarily. The United States was really interested in intelligence gathering and in providing kind of, we say in English, a thorn in the side, being a nuisance.
But they are not interested in restoring Tibetan independence.
They were not, no. They did not support the Tibetan army or the Tibetan government, His Holiness's government in exile, in a way that would enable them to fully challenge China successfully.
Okay, so Chushu Gangdruk grew from a regional to a pan-Tibetan resistance movement and now reversed back to a regional. So do you think that Chushu Gangdruk today became an impotent and will there ever be a future when it will reclaim its role as a defender of Buddha Dhamma?
Right. So this is one of the problems for Chushu Gangdruk that was a problem in the 1960s and 1970s and remains so today. And that is that Chushu Gangdruk was predominantly a Khampa organization, but not only. We know there are soldiers, there were whole units, battalions from Amdo, from Utsang. There were even some Chinese in there who had fled, who were part of Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist army. And many Tibetans will tell you about Jia Losantashi, so a Chinese soldier who took on a Tibetan name and lived in Bailakupi for many years until his death. So even though Chushu Gangdruk had men from around Tibet, it was dominated by Khampas. And that was true during the time of the war, and that remains so now. So Chushu Gangdruk is a regional organization in that it mostly represents Khampas and is seen to represent Khampas. But really, in some ways, I think there's two things that are important here. One is that it was an organization, military organization, originally acting for all of Tibet. It was not just defending Kham, it was defending Tibet.
Yes, so today it's a regional, that's also a setback for the organization and there's no official commemoration and acknowledgement and so on. So is it a weakness because being a regional today?
Is it a weakness? Well, I guess the question is, why is it a weakness in the Tibetan community to be seen as a regional organization, So in the Tibetan exile community right now, to be a group just for Amdo or just for Kham or just for Ubas is seen as something that is bad. And I think that's a question the Tibetan community needs to think more about. Why is it bad to organize according to region?
Succeeded in uniting in Tibet, so they united, but now it becomes like that. But in Tibet, they united the whole country.
Right.
Okay.
What to say? In exile, right now, it's considered a problem. I don't necessarily think regions should be a problem. There are many things that are precious and special and unique in positive ways about the different regions of Tibet. And I think sometimes people feel safe with folks they trust, when they have generations of shared history.
Yeah, so we're running out of time, and one final question. We Tibetans say to have soft power, whereas the Chinese have the hard power. Do you think will there ever be the soft power triumphing over the hard powers?
Yes, I do. Yes. So power cannot, even though we're talking about an army, I think power can not only come from guns, and from battle. And Chushu Gangdruk was as motivated to defend religion, and to defend soft power as it was an organization that was trying to use military might to succeed. Tibet's power right now in the world, I think has to come from soft power. And China will fall not because of hard power, I believe, but because there will be an uprising from within China. The Chinese people themselves will probably be the ones who change China, and that will be a soft power revolution.
Okay, so due to time, that's all I have today.
Okay.
And thank you very much. Very appreciated, Professor Carole McGranahan.
You're welcome. Thank you, Dorjee.
Thank you.
Yeah.